Hello everyone, we have to discuss about that global politics part 4. Focus on closing the realism and liberalism and dividation through the realism and the liberalism are the commonly and the patron portrayed and the antithetical and the theories of the international politics, the one and the emphasis and the egoism and the powers and the conflict, the other moralities, peace and the cooperation, the differences and between them as the tended and to the faded over the times. And one of the characteristic features of the neoliberalism is in the expectance of the certain neoliberalism assumption making them are for the extension happier than the traditionals and liberals to explain the state and behaviors in terms of the self-interested and to the expected that the international system is essentially an anarchical and similarly and most the moderns and realist and are the weak or the haggled realist is not in that and they the acceptant and they're the international politics भाई मैं यंग थे लाम दे दूँगी पेल पे International politics cannot be explained exclusively in the terms of the powers and the self-interested and the conflict and the so-called new and the new debates and the has the therefore the becomes and the in singly technicals and rather than the foundational debate the ideas and there the international politics is the best explanations and in the light of the both and realism and the liberals insights and the recognitions the counterbalancing and force of the conflict and the cooperation has been the complied and since the 1916 and by the theorist and who the subscribes and to the notions of the international society and sometimes the seen as the English schools and of the international relations. This views the modes and the yearlist the emphasis on the powers and politics and international anarchy and by the suggesting the existences of the society of the states and rather than the simply the system of the state and the simply and that the international relations are rules the governed and they the rules and the ruled and help to the mention in international order the chief and the institution and that the generated cultures and the cohesions and social integrations and the international law and the diplomacies and the activities and of the international organizations. Hadley Bulls 2002 and thus the advance the notions and of the an anarchical society in place and of the convention and the realist ideas of the international anarchy international society theory can be the seen as other form of the liberal realism liberal institution and approach and to the study and that the emphasis of the roles and of the institution on both the formals and the informals and the realizations and of the inner liberals and principles and goals and rules of the law the principle and that law the should and rules and the senses and that it's the established other frameworks and within and which all the conduct and the behaviors and talks places idea of what is called the liberalism, institutionalism, and the basis and for such are the view and leads the domestics and the idea and the analogies, the ideas and there the insight and into the international politics and can be the gained by the reflecting and on the structures of the domestics and taking the particular amount of the social contract and theories as developed as the thinker and such the Hobbes and the John Locke in 1632 and 1704 thus this the highlighted the fact and that only the constructions of other sovereign powers and can sovereign powers sovereign powers and cans the social contract theory as developed and by the thinkers and such as the Hobbes and the John Locke 1632 से लेकर 1704 and this highlights the fact that the only contracted and of other sovereign powers and can the safeguard citizens and from the choose and barbary of the states and of the nations and if the orders and can only by the imposed and from the above in the domestic politics He same must be the truth and of the international politics, and this the provided the basis and for the establishment of the rule of laws, in which is the Woodrow and Wilson and put it the bottoms the jungles of the international politics into other Jew and the election of the national nations was the first inflows if flows an attempt to the translated and such the thinkings and into the practice the United Nations and has the attracted and the far wider supports and the established and itself as other seamless and the permanent features of the global politics, and the liberals and have the looked to the such politics and to the bodies to the establish other rule of the govern and the international systems that would be the based on the collective security and the respect for the international laws. Modern neoliberalism and have the world and on this the positives and approach to the international organization and practicing and fronts practicing and what has been called the neoliberalism, institutionalism, and dance, distancing themselves and from the cosmopolitans and dreams and of the some early liberals, and they have the instead and explain growing the cooperation and the integrations in the functions and terms linked to the self-interested and the institutions, and thus comes into the existences as the mediators to the facilitated and corporations among the states on matter of the common interest, and whereas the nihilist and argued and that the such and the cooperation is always the difficult and prone to breaks. Is democracy are the guarantee of the peace? The democracy peace and these the supports and by the most liberals and the suggested that the democracy and peace and are the link and the particularly in the sense and that the words do not occur the between democratic state and realist and the others, and nevertheless argued and that there is nothing and the necessary and peaceful about the democracy. For John of the Peace and much interested in the ideas of the democracy and peace that derived and from the empathicals and analysis. As the democracy has the spirit and Jones of the peace and have the emerged in which the military conflicts has becomes and the virtualities and the unthinkables, and this the certainties. सुनावे के लिए चलाओ का खुद सुनो. As democracy has the separate zone of the peace and have the emerged and in the which military conflict has become the virtualities as the unthinkables, and this the certainly applied to the Europes and previously and rebels and by the bar and the conflict in North America and the Australasias, and historian seems to the suggested this bar do not the break sound between democratic status and the although as the proponent of the democratic peace and thesis the expectant war the continue to occur the between the democratic and the authoritarian state public opinion. Liberals argues and that war are the accused and by the government and not by the peoples, and this is the because and it is the citizens and themselves who are the likely and to be the wars and the victims, and they are the ones and who will do the killings and the dyings, and who will be the suffers and disruptions and the hardships in short, and they have no match for the war in the event of the international conflict, and democracies and will the six and the accommodations and rather than the confrontation and use the force only as the last and resource, and then only for the purposes of the self defense. Non-violence conflict resolutions the essence of the democratic governance and is a the process of the compromise and conciliations and the negotiations, and through the which rebels and interested over the groups and the find a way of living and the together a way of the living together, and rather than the resorting to forces and the use of the nagged powers, and this after all and is the purpose of election and the parliament and pressure the groups and so on. Not only is it the likely and that the regimes and based on the compromise and the conciliations and will the apply and such as the approach into the foreign policy as well as the domestic policy and but the governments and the unused and to using the force and to the resolve civil the conflict and will be the lays and inclined in clean to use and force and to the result in international conflict. Cultural bond culturals and the ties and developed and the among and democracies and the because the democratic rules and tend to the fosters and particular norms and value and thus and the include other belief and in the constitutionals and government and respect for the freedom of speech and the guarantees and for the property and other and power and ownerships and the common moral fundamentals and that the undampen and the democratic government and to means and that the democrats and views the each others and as the friends and rather than as the fuse and peaceful coexistences and among the democracies and therefore the appearance and to be other natural conditions. Against democracies and about the ideas that the democracy are the inherently and the peaceful is the undermined and why the continues and evidence of the war and between the democratic and the authoritarians and state and some things and that most of the democratics and peace the theorists and acknowledge and moreover the empiricals and the evidence and to the support the thesis and is the revealed and by the confusions and over and which resides equally. Qualified as the democracies and if the universals and the suffrage and the multi-parties and elections and are the course and features of the democratic government in NATO bombardment of the Serbs and the troops in the Kosovos in the 1999 and the Russia's invasions of the Georgias in 2008 and are the both expansions to the democratic and the peace the sieges. Moreover, the wars in the Afghanistan and the Iraq and both the demonstrated that the democracies and do not go to bar go to the bar and only for the purposes and of the self-defense and state are the states. Realist and the theorist and the argued the factors and that the make and for the some bar apply to the democratics and the authorians. Moreover, the bar in the Afghanistan and the Iraq and both the demonstrated and the democratics and do not go to the bar and only for the purposes of the self-defense. State are the state and realist, the theorist and argued the factor and that the make and for the wars apply to the democratics and authorizers and states alike and in the particulars and the constitutions structures and offer the states and does not and never can the alters the selflessness and agreed and potential for the volume violence that is the simply and part of the human natures and far from the always and opposing and war the public opinions. Therefore, sometimes and the impel the democratics and the government and towards the foreign policies and advantages and the expansionism and the European imperialism and World War First and the and perhaps the bar and on the terrors and is the illustrations and this the realist and the moreover and argues that the tendencies and towards war the derived and less from the constitutionals and makeups and of the state and more from the far and the substantial and that are and the unavoidables and the consequences of the international anarchy peace by the other means and the although the divisions of the world into zone of the peace and the zone of the turmoil and why maybe an undeniable features of the modern world politics, and it is the far and from the clear and that the different is due only and or even the chiefly and to the democracy and for the example pattern of the economic interdependence that the resultant from the free trade may be the more independence and that the resultant for the free trade may be the same more. May be the more effective in the maintaining and peace amongst the democratics and then the populace preserve and similarly it is maybe the more in the significant and that the matures and the liberals and democrats and are the wealthy then that and they are the either and liberals and or the democrats and in this the views and war is and the untreating and unnarratives and the prompts. International regimes are regimes and is other set of the principles and the procedures procedures and norms of the rules and that the govern and the interactions and of the state and the non-states and the acting is the particulars. Hari Bhagwan. Is the particulars and norms is the particulars and the international regimes are regimes and is other set of the principle and the procedures and norms of the rules and that the govern the interactions and of the states and the non-state actors in the particular size areas within the international politics and as such they are the social institutions with either other forms of the or informal characters and examples of the remedy regimes and the include the treaties and the convention and international arguments agreement and international organizations and thus now the operated in other wide varieties. Basing communities and the show on the greatness and the significance of the resigns reflected the growth of the interdependence and the recognitions and that the cooperation and the coordinations can beings absolute the gains and to all the parties and resigns and they even provided other networks and of the regulatories. Absolute gain and benefits and the acute and to the started from other policies and or the action and the regardless of there's the impact and on the other states and the post positivism and the approach and to the knowledge and that the questions the ideas of the and the objective reality and emphasis the instead the extended to the which and pupils and the conscience or the contract the world in which they will down because of the emphasis and by the states and over the relatives and gains and new liberals asserts and that the states and are the more and concerned and with the absolute gains and instead and of the consultancies and engagings and in the one and the upmanships and state are the always and willing to the cooperated if they the calculated and that they will be the better off in the real terms and as other result and although the neoliberalism and use such International Monetary Fund and IMF, and to the regimes the economically blocs and such as the European Union. They also draw, draw the attention and to the more informations institution in this the they and the embraced, and what has been the killed and new the institutional critical perspectives, mainstream perspective and on the international politics and the world affairs, and has been the challenges by the growing the array of the critical perspective, many of the which have only the gained and prominented and since the late of the 1918. Critical perspective and the mainstreams and the perspectives and on the international politics and the world affairs. World affair move have the changes and by other growing array of the criticals and perspectives, and may of the which and have the only gained prominent and since the US since the late 1918, and although and such the perspectives and are the often and very the different from the one another's, and they tend to the have and to the broad and things in common. Although and thus the perspectives and are often many of which have only the gain and the prominented and since the last 1918, and although thus the perspectives and are often in they the distance and from the one another's, and they the tend and to have to the board and things in commons. The first is that with the exceptions of the orthodox and the Marxism and the most and the perform. The first is that the with the expansions of the orthodox and the Marxist and the most forms and of theory is always for the some things.